The manager was already pointing at the door when Sarah stepped between him and the shivering old man. The diner had gone silent. Customers stared. Rain hammered against the windows. Everyone saw a homeless beggar who couldn't even afford soup. What they didn't know, what he didn't know, was that this waitress had less than $40 to her name, a sick child at home, and an eviction notice waiting on her phone. And what they didn't know, but the audience soon would, was that the man she was defending controlled a $6 billion empire and was quietly deciding who deserved to inherit it. One sentence from Sarah would destroy a family dynasty forever. The rain in Seattle was relentless, a grey curtain that seemed to wash away the color of the city, leaving only slick pavement and the neon reflection of the Route 66 diner sign flickering in a puddle. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, frying bacon, and damp wool. It was 11:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, the graveyard shift, and Sarah Jenkins was already 3 hours into her second double shift of the week. Sarah wiped a grease stain off the laminate counter, her movements automatic. At 26, she carried the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a frayed scrunchie, and her apron was stained with ketchup from table 4, a group of drunk college students who had left her a grand total of 35 cents as a tip. She checked her phone surreptitiously. A text from her landlady, Mrs. Higgins. "Rent is past due, Sarah. You have until Friday, or I'm changing the locks." Sarah shoved the phone back into her pocket, fighting the sting of tears. She had $40 in her bank account. Her daughter Maya needed a new inhaler which cost $50. The math never worked. It never did. Sarah stopped daydreaming and wiped down booth 6, shouted Rick, the diner's manager, a man whose primary management style was volume. On it, Rick Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fatigue. As she moved toward booth 6, the bell above the door chimed. A gust of cold wind blew in, carrying with it a figure that made the few patrons in the diner stiffen. He was an old man, hunched over, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He wore an oversized stained army jacket that looked like it had been pulled from a dumpster. His grey beard was matted, and he wore a beanie pulled low over his eyes. He shuffled in dripping water onto the checkerboard floor. Rick was there in a second, blocking the man's path. Whoa, hold it right there, Pops. This isn't a shelter. Restrooms are for paying customers only." The old man looked up. His eyes, a piercing shade of icy blue, were the only sharp thing about him. "I intend to pay." He rasped his voice, sounding like dry leaves crunching underfoot. "Just a coffee and maybe some soup." "Let me see your money." Rick sneered, crossing his arms. The diner went silent. The couple in booth 3 whispered to each other, looking at the old man with undisguised disgust. The old man's shaking hand went into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled wad of singles and some loose change. He counted it out on his palm. $3.50. Coffee is $2. Soup is $4. You can't afford it. "Get out," Rick said, pointing at the door. "You're scaring the customers." Rick stopped. Sarah's voice cut through the tension. She stepped between her manager and the old man. "Sarah, don't start," Rick warned. "He's hungry and it's pouring rain," Sarah said firmly, her protective instinct flaring. She looked at the old man. He looked frail, shivering slightly. He reminded her of her own grandfather before he passed alone and misunderstood. "I'll pay for his soup." "Put it on my tab." Rick rolled his eyes, throwing his hands up. "Fine. But if he causes a scene or smells up the place, it's coming out of your paycheck and you're cleaning the booth." "Deal," Sarah said. She turned to the man and offered a gentle smile. The first genuine one the diner had seen all night. "Hi, I'm Sarah. Ignore him. He's got a bark, worse than his bite. Come on, take the booth by the radiator. It'll help you dry off." The old man looked at her for a long moment, studying her face, as if memorizing it. "Thank you, miss," he murmured. He didn't shuffle to the booth. He walked with a strange, deliberate slowness. What Sarah didn't know, what nobody knew, was that under the grime and the rags was a suit tailored on Savile Row. The homeless man was Arthur Penhaligon, Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Global, a man whose net worth hovered around $6 billion. And he wasn't just hungry, he was hunting. Arthur sat in the booth, the warmth of the radiator seeping into his fake arthritis. He watched Sarah move. He had spent the last 40 years watching people, mostly vultures in boardrooms, or his own children, Julian and Victoria, who circled his fortune like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Last week, his doctor had given him the news. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, maybe 6 months, maybe less. When he told his children, Victoria had asked about the succession plan before she even asked how he felt. Julian had immediately called the lawyers to ensure the trust funds were secure. That night, Arthur had realized a terrifying truth. He was going to die, and his legacy would be used to fuel the vanity and greed of 2 people he didn't even like, let alone respect. He needed an heir, but not one of blood. He needed one of heart. So he devised the test. He had visited 5 high-end restaurants and 3 hotels in the last week, disguised as a beggar. He had been thrown out of all of them. Sarah set a steaming mug of coffee and a bowl of chicken noodle soup in front of him. She also placed a basket of warm bread rolls on the table. "I didn't order the bread," Arthur said, gruffly staying in character. "I can't pay for it." "It's on the house," Sarah winked. "Cook made too many. Better you eat them than the trash can." It was a lie. Arthur knew the inventory sheets of businesses like this. Every roll was counted. She was giving him her own staff meal. "Why are you doing this?" Arthur asked, his voice low. Sarah paused the coffee pot in her hand. She looked tired. Dark circles under her eyes, her shoes worn down at the heels. "Doing what? Treating a bum like a king," Arthur challenged her. "Look at me. I'm nobody. I can't do anything for you. I can't get you a better job. I can't tip you." Sarah sighed, looking out the window at the rain. "You know my daughter Maya. She wants to be a doctor. She's 7. She asked me the other day why bad things happen to good people." Arthur waited. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that the world isn't bad. It's just busy," Sarah said softly. "Everyone is running so fast, trying to survive, that they forget to look down. They forget that the person sitting on the curb is just a person. You aren't a bum, sir. You're a human being who is cold and hungry. If I can't fix the world for Maya, the least I can do is fix a bowl of soup for you." Arthur felt a lump form in his throat, a sensation he hadn't felt since his wife Eleanor died 20 years ago. He took a sip of the soup to hide his expression. "You're a fool," he grumbled. "Kindness gets you killed in this city." "Maybe," Sarah shrugged, picking up her tray, "but indifference kills you slower." She went back to work. Arthur ate in silence, observing. He watched a businessman at another table snap his fingers at her. Sarah didn't flinch. She smiled and refilled his water. He watched Rick berate her for a mixed-up order that wasn't her fault. She took the blame to save the cook from getting yelled at. She wasn't just kind, she was resilient. When Arthur finished, he reached into the hidden pocket of his inner jacket. He had a stack of $100 bills there, but he didn't touch them. The test wasn't over. He pulled out a single $5 bill. It was crisp, contrasting with his rags. He placed it on the table. It was a significant amount for a homeless man. He waved Sarah over. "I'm heading out," Arthur said, standing up. The soup was adequate. "I'm glad it warmed you up," Sarah said. She looked at the table and saw the $5. Her eyes widened. She reached out and picked it up. "Sir, you left this. she said, holding it out to him. "It's a tip," Arthur said stubbornly, "for the service." Sarah looked at the bill, then down at Arthur's shoes. They were canvas sneakers, soaked through with a hole in the toe. He was shaking slightly from the damp cold. $5 could buy him a pair of thick wool socks at the surplus store down the street. She took his hand. Her hand was warm, rough from work, but gentle, and pressed the bill back into his palm. "I can't take this," she said firmly. "I have my pride, girl." Arthur snapped, his blue eyes flashing. "Don't pity me." "It's not pity," Sarah said. And then she said the words that would change history. She looked him dead in the eye, stripping away the billionaire and the beggar, seeing only the soul. "So money is just a tool for survival, not a measure of worth. You keep this not because you're poor, but because, today, you are the customer and I am the host. And in my house, guests don't pay for kindness. Use it to buy dry socks, please. For me, I can't sleep tonight knowing your feet are freezing." Arthur Sterling froze. The wind howled outside, rattling the glass, but inside his mind, everything went still. In my house, guests don't pay for kindness. He had spent millions on galas, charities, and foundations, all to have his name carved in marble. Yet here was a woman with negative net worth offering him dignity for free. He looked at the $5 in his hand. Then he looked at Sarah. "You really mean that, don't you?" he whispered. "Go." She smiled gently, turning him toward the door. "Get those socks and come back when you're hungry. The soup is always on me." Arthur nodded slowly. He didn't say goodbye. He walked out into the rain, clutching the $5 tighter than he had ever clutched a stock certificate. He walked around the corner into the dark alleyway, where a black Rolls-Royce Phantom was waiting engine-idling silently. His driver, a massive man named Graves, opened the back door. "Mr. Sterling, how did it go? Did they kick you out?" Arthur shed the wet army jacket, revealing the silk vest underneath. He climbed into the leather interior, the scent of expensive mahogany filling his nose. "Get me Marcus Thorne on the phone," Arthur commanded, his voice returning to the steel baritone of a CEO. "Now it's midnight, sir," Graves noted. "I don't care if he's sleeping. Wake him up," Arthur said, staring out the rain-streaked window at the neon sign of the diner. "Tell him to bring the draft of my will. We're rewriting the whole damn thing tonight." The penthouse of the Sterling Tower was a fortress of glass and steel, floating 50 stories above the city that Arthur Sterling had helped build. Inside, the air was filtered, scented with white tea and expensive leather, a stark contrast to the grease and rain of the Route 60 Essex diner. Victoria Sterling, Arthur's 40-year-old daughter, paced the Persian rug, her Louboutin heels clicking rhythmically like a ticking clock. She was on the phone, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't care about the board's hesitation, Julian," she snapped into her iPhone. "Father is senile. He's wandering the streets at night. Yesterday security said he left without a detail again. If the shareholders find out the CEO is playing hobo, the stock will tank before we can sell our shares." On the other end of the line, Julian Sterling, 3 years her junior, laughed. He was currently in Monaco, sitting at a high-stakes baccarat table, holding a glass of scotch that cost more than Sarah Jenkins made in a month. Let the old man wander, Vic. Ideally, he wanders into traffic. We just need him to hold on for 2 more weeks until the merger with Omnicorp is finalized. Then we can declare him incompetent and take power of attorney. He's meeting with Marcus Thorne tonight. Victoria said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "At midnight, Graves told me." Thorne Julian's laugh stopped. "Why is he seeing the family lawyer in the middle of the night? I don't know." Victoria hissed, looking out at the city lights. "But I don't like it. Make sure you're back in Seattle by morning. If he's changing the trust structures, we need to be ready to contest it." While his children plotted his demise, Arthur Sterling sat in his mahogany-paneled study, wrapped in a plush robe that felt too heavy for his frail shoulders. Across from him sat Marcus Thorne, a man with silver hair and a face carved from granite. Thorne had been Arthur's legal counsel for 30 years. He had buried Arthur's secrets, fought his hostile takeovers, and now he was tasked with the most dangerous job of all. "You're certain about this, Arthur?" Marcus asked, his fountain pen hovering over the thick document on the desk. "This isn't just a revision. This is a nuclear detonation. If you signed this, you are effectively declaring war on your own bloodline from beyond the grave." Arthur coughed a wet, rattling sound that shook his thin frame. He took a sip of water. "They aren't my blood, Marcus. They are parasites. I created them. I indulged them. I taught them that value comes from a price tag, not from labor. That waitress, Sarah." Arthur closed his eyes, remembering the warmth of the diner. "She had nothing, and she offered me everything. She has a daughter, Marcus, a sick child, and she gave her last $5 to a stranger because she didn't want my feet to be cold." He opened his eyes, and they burned with a terrifying clarity. "Julian spent $200 on a watch last week." A watch. He didn't even look at the waiter who served him his drink. "I will not leave my empire to monsters. The press will have a field day," Marcus warned. "Victoria will sue. She'll claim you were mentally unstable. She'll drag this girl, this Sarah Jenkins, through the mud. They will investigate her past, her debts, her mistakes. They will try to destroy her." "That is why you are the executive," Arthur said, sliding a heavy manila envelope across the desk. "Inside is a dossier on Sarah. I had my private security team, Blackwood, run a background check in the last hour. She's clean, struggling, but clean. Outstanding debts for medical bills, a pristine record. She's a fighter." Arthur picked up the pen. His hand trembled, but his resolve did not. "Structure the inheritance as a blind trust," Arthur commanded. Section 7, paragraph 4. "The identity of the beneficiary is to remain sealed for 30 days after my death. During those 30 days, Julian and Victoria will believe they have won. Let them spend. Let them reveal their true colors to the board." And then Arthur smiled a grim shark-like expression. "Then you drop the hammer." He signed the document with a flourish. "Arthur Penhaligon Sterling." "It is done," Arthur whispered, sinking back into his chair. "Now I can finally sleep." 3 weeks later, the headline on the Seattle Times was in bold black font. "The Lion Sleeps. Arthur Sterling dead at 78. The city was in mourning, or at least the part of the city that cared about stock prices and charitable galas was. Flags flew at half-mast. Tributes poured in from senators and business rivals. But at the Route 66 diner, the news played on a small, greasy television mounted in the corner, largely ignored by the breakfast rush. Sarah Jenkins was balancing 3 plates of eggs, Benedict on her arm, dodging a busboy. She caught a glimpse of the TV screen. The photo showed Arthur Sterling in his prime, a tuxedo, a glass of champagne, a stern, powerful glare. "Sad, ain't it?" said old Joe, a regular at the counter. "Guy had more money than God, and still kicked the bucket like the rest of us." Sarah paused, looking at the photo. Something about the eyes, that piercing, icy blue. They looked familiar. But the man on TV was a titan, a king. The man she remembered was a shivering, kind-hearted, homeless soul she knew simply as Artie. He hadn't come back in weeks. She had saved a pair of thick wool socks in her locker for him, just in case. "I hope Artie is okay." She thought a pang of worry hitting her chest. Maybe he found a shelter. She didn't have time to dwell on it. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. It was the text she had been dreading. "From landlord Sarah, you're short $400. I'm sorry. I filed the eviction notice. You have 72 hours to vacate." The plate in her hand slipped. It crashed to the floor, shattering into ceramic shards and splattering Holland sauce everywhere. Sarah Rick screamed from the office. "That's coming out of your tips." Sarah fell to her knees to pick up the pieces, tears finally spilling over. The world was crashing down. Her daughter Maya was at school, unaware that in 3 days they would be sleeping in Sarah's 2005 Honda Civic. She didn't notice the black sedan pull up to the curb outside. She didn't notice the 2 men in dark suits step out, looking out of place among the truckers and tired nurses. Meanwhile, at the Sterling estate, the mood was closer to a celebration than a funeral. The wake was being held in the grand ballroom. Julian was already wearing a new Italian suit, holding court with a group of investors. Victoria was directing the caterers, ensuring the champagne was vintage Dom Perignon. "It's tragic, truly," Julian was saying to a weeping aunt, checking his watch. "But Father would want us to push forward. Innovation doesn't stop for grief." As soon as the aunt walked away, Julian turned to Victoria. "Did you speak to Marcus?" "He's here," Victoria said, nodding toward the library. "He's been locked in there with the notary for an hour. He says the reading of the will is scheduled for 200 p.m. sharp in 10 minutes. Finally, Julian exhaled. "I've got creditors in McCaw breathing down my neck. I need access to the liquid assets by Monday." "Relax," Victoria scoffed. "We're the only heirs. Mum is dead. He had no siblings. Who else is he going to leave it to the cat?" At 200 p.m., the family gathered in the library. It was a somber room, lined with first edition books that nobody in the family had ever read. Marcus Thorne sat at the head of the long oak table. He looked tired. He looked dangerous. Julian sat on the right, Victoria on the left. They tried to look solemn, but their eyes were greedy, darting to the thick leather binder in front of Marcus. "Let's get this over with, Marcus," Julian said. "We know the drill. Split 50-50. Control of the board to me. The real estate portfolio to Victoria." Marcus didn't blink. He adjusted his glasses. Arthur made some significant amendments in his final days. Victoria stiffened. Amendments? What kind of amendments? Arthur felt that the stewardship of Sterling Industries required a specific type of character. Marcus began, his voice steady. He felt that his legacy should not be defined by blood, but by merit. "Cut the philosophy," Julian snapped. "Read the damn numbers." Marcus opened the binder. "To my son, Julian." Marcus read. "I leave my collection of vintage cufflinks and a one-way ticket to a rehabilitation center of his choice. I leave no equity, no cash, and no property." The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of Julian's lungs. "What?" Julian whispered. "Is this a joke?" "To my daughter Victoria." Marcus continued, ignoring him. "I leave the portrait of her mother that hangs in the hallway, in hopes that looking at it will one day remind her of the compassion she lacked in life. I leave no equity, no cash, and no property." Victoria stood up so fast her chair fell over. "This is insane. He was crazy. We'll contest it. You can't do this." "I haven't finished," Marcus said, his voice rising, commanding the room. The entirety of the Sterling estate, including the controlling interest in Sterling Industries, the properties in London, New York, and Tokyo, and the liquid assets totaling $4.2 billion are left to a single beneficiary. "Who?" Victoria shrieked, her face turning a blotchy red. "Who is she? Is it a mistress? Did he have a bastard child?" Marcus looked up from the paper, looking directly into the camera of the hidden security feed Arthur had asked him to install, knowing Arthur would have wanted to see this moment, even from the afterlife. The sole beneficiary is a Ms. Sarah Jenkins. Who the hell is Sarah Jenkins? Julian roared. She is a waitress at the Route 66 diner, Marcus said, calmly. And as of this moment, she is your landlord. And I suggest you lower your voices, because I am currently on my way to fetch her. Marcus closed the binder with a heavy thud. Gentlemen, he signaled to the security guards, escort Mr. and Ms. Sterling off the premises. The new owner will decide if they are allowed back in. As the security guards moved forward, Victoria began to scream, smashing a vase against the wall. Julian just sat there, mouth open, his world dissolving. Marcus stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the library. He walked past the weeping relatives and the confused caterers. He walked out to his car. "Where to, Mr. Thorne?" his driver asked. "The Route 66 diner," Marcus said. "I have a tip to deliver." The atmosphere inside the Route 66 diner was toxic. Rick the manager was standing over Sarah, his face a mask of petty fury. The shattered plate lay between them like a broken promise. "You're clumsy, you're distracted, and frankly, Sarah, you're bad for business," Rick spat, wiping sweat from his receding hairline. "Clean this up. Hand over your apron and get out. You're done." Sarah felt a cold numbness spread through her chest. This was it, the precipice. Without this job, she couldn't pay Mrs. Higgins. Without Mrs. Higgins, she and Maya were on the street. She opened her mouth to beg to trade her dignity for another week of minimum wage. But the bell above the door chimed. It wasn't the usual tinkle of the bell. It was a herald. Marcus Thorne stepped into the diner. In a room of grease-stained linoleum and flickering fluorescent lights, he looked like a visitor from another planet. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that cost more than the diner's annual revenue. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and he carried a leather attaché case with the gravity of a man carrying nuclear codes. Behind him, two large men in dark suits, Arthur's private security detail, took positions by the door, effectively sealing the room. Clear's throat. The diner fell silent. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Even the fry cook peered out from the kitchen. Rick's jaw dropped. He smoothed his apron, his demeanor shifting instantly from bully to sycophant. Can I help you set table for one?" Marcus didn't even look at him. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on the woman kneeling on the floor, picking up ceramic shards with trembling hands. "I'm looking for Miss Sarah Jenkins," Marcus announced, his voice deep and resonant. Rick blinked. "Sarah, she's actually just leaving. Personnel issue. If she owes you money, I can give you her forwarding address." "I am not here to collect a debt," Marcus said, stepping around Rick as if he were a traffic cone. He extended a hand towards Sarah. "Miss Jenkins, please leave the glass." Sarah looked up, her eyes redimmed. She recognized the authority in the man's voice, but fear was still her dominant emotion. "Am I in trouble? Is this about the hospital bills? I'm paying them off. I swear I just need more time." Clear's throat. Marcus's expression softened. It was the first crack in his professional armor. "You are not in trouble, Sarah. Please stand up." He helped her to her feet. She wiped her hands on her dirty apron, ashamed of the Holland sauce smeared on her uniform. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I am the executive of the estate of the late Arthur Penhaligon Sterling." The name meant, Clear's throat, nothing to her. "I don't know who that is." "You knew him as Artie," Marcus said gently. "The gentleman with the army jacket. The one you gave soup to. The one you gave your last $5 to." Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Artie. Oh no. Did he pass away?" Rick let out a snort of derision. "That old hobo." "You're a lawyer for a hobo." Marcus turned his head, slowly fixing Rick with a glare that could freeze magma. Mr. Sterling was the founder and CEO of Sterling Global Industries. He was one of the wealthiest men in the Western Hemisphere. and I suggest you remain silent, or I will have this establishment condemned for health code violations before the sun sets." Rick turned pale and took a step back, hitting the counter. Marcus turned back to Sarah. "Yes, Sarah. Arthur passed away 3 weeks ago. He spoke of you until the very end. He wanted you to know that the socks you told him to buy, he bought them. They were very warm." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "He was a sweet man. I missed him. I saved a scarf for him in the back." "He didn't need the scarf," Marcus said, his voice thickening with emotion. "But he needed to know that someone would save it for him. He tested many people, Sarah. His own family, his business partners. Everyone saw a beggar. You were the only one who saw a man." Clear's throat. Marcus placed the atta case on a nearby table booth 6, where Arthur had sat, and clicked the latches open. "Arthur has left a last will and testament. Due to the specific terms of his trust, the assets were transferred immediately upon the reading, which concluded 40 minutes ago." "Assets?" Sarah asked, confused. "Did he leave me something? A keepsake?" "He left you everything." Marcus, Clear's throat, said he pulled out a document stamped with the official seal of the Washington State Supreme Court, effective immediately. "You are the sole owner of the Sterling estate. This includes the manor in Medina, the penthouse in Manhattan, the chateau in Leon, and the controlling majority stock of Sterling Global." Sarah stared at him. Clear's throat. The words were English, but they didn't make sense. "I don't understand," Sarah Marcus said, looking her dead in the eye. "He left you $4.2 billion and an empire." The sound in the diner seemed to suck away. Sarah felt the floor tilt. "Billion with a B. With a B," Marcus confirmed. "You are now one of the richest women in the world." Rick made a choking sound. $4 billion. Sarah grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. "This is a mistake. I'm a waitress. I have negative $300 in my bank account. I can't run a company. I have a daughter. And your daughter will never worry about a medical bill again," Marcus said firmly. Arthur knew this would be terrifying. "He asked me to guide you. I will be your legal counsel, your shield, and your sword, until you are ready to stand on your own. But right now, you need to come with me. It is not safe for you here. The press will find out within the hour." Sarah looked around the diner. She looked at the scuffed floor she had mopped 1,000 times. She looked at the broken plate. She looked at Rick, who was now looking at her with a mix of terror and greedy adoration. Sarah Baby Rick stammered, sweating profusely. "I was just joking earlier about the firing. You know we're family here. I always knew you were special. Hey, maybe I can come to manage your estate. We make a good team, right?" Sarah straightened her spine. For the first time in years, the weight of poverty, the crushing, suffocating pressure of survival lifted. She took off her apron. She folded it neatly. She placed it on the table next to the legal documents. "Rick," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "The soup is $4, the coffee is $2. That's $6 coming out of my final paycheck." She turned to Marcus. "Take me to my daughter, then take me to Artie's house." "Of course, Miss Jenkins." Marcus bowed slightly. As they walked out of the diner, Rick ran to the door. Sarah, wait. You can't just leave me here." "Who's going to work the double shift?" Sarah paused at the door of the sleek black limousine that had pulled up. Graves, the driver, held the door open. She looked back at the neon sign buzzing in the rain. "I don't know, Rick," she said. "But I'm sure you'll figure it out. It's just business." She slid into the car, and for the first time in her life, the door closed with a solid, expensive thud, shutting out the cold, the rain, and the fear. While Sarah was being whisked away into a world of heated leather seats and bulletproof glass, A war room was being assembled in the executive suite of the Four Seasons Hotel. Julian and Victoria Sterling were not people who accepted defeat. They accepted lawsuits. They accepted bribery. They accepted scorched earth tactics. But they never accepted no. They sat on a plush velvet sofa facing a man who made Marcus Thorne look like a choir boy. Silas Vane was a fixer. Technically, he was a lawyer, but his license had been suspended twice for ethics violations that were whispered about in dark corners of the legal world. He was the man you called when you didn't want justice. You wanted a burial. "Let me get this straight," Silas said, pouring himself a drink from the hotel minia. He was a thin, serpentine man with eyes that seemed to lack pupils. "Your father left a multinational conglomerate to a waitress because she bought him soup." He was insane, Victoria hissed, lighting a cigarette despite the non-smoking signs. "It's undue influence. He was on heavy medication for the cancer. She probably drugged him or seduced him." "We need to destroy the will. The will is ironclad," Silas said, taking a sip. "I know Marcus Thorne. He doesn't make mistakes with paperwork. If Arthur signed it, and he was deemed mentally competent by his doctors, which I'm assuming Marcus ensured, then attacking the document is a waste of time. So we just lose," Julian shouted, throwing a crystal coaster across the room. It shattered against the wall. "I have a margin call on Monday, Silas. If I don't have access to the trust, they're going to seize my yacht, my assets." "Calm down, you petulant child," Silas snapped. "I said attacking the document is a waste of time. We don't attack the will, we attack the girl." Silas opened a folder on his lap. He had already begun his work. "Sarah Jenkins, 26, high school dropout. One child, mere age 7. Father of the child is one Bradley Cooper. No relation to the actor, unfortunately. Just a mechanic with a gambling problem and a record for petty theft." Silas smiled, a jagged, unpleasant thing. "The clause in the trust says, the beneficiary must be of sound moral character to inherit the CIO position, otherwise the board can vote to install a proxy until the beneficiary is deemed fit." So Victoria asked. So Silas leaned forward. "We don't need to prove the will is fake. We just need to prove she is incompetent, immoral, or a danger to the company. We paint her as a gold digger who preyed on a dying man. We dig up her dirt. And if she doesn't have dirt, we manufacture it," how Julian asked. "We use the ex-Silos said. We find this Bradley guy. We pay him enough to claim she's an unfit mother. We get Child Protective Services involved. We create a media storm so toxic that the board of directors will beg you two to step back in and save the company image." Victoria smiled, blowing a plume of smoke into the air. "I like it. Destroy the girl. Save the money." "Find him," Julian ordered. "Offer him whatever he wants. Just get him to say she's unstable." Across the city, Sarah sat in the library of Sterling Manor. It was a room larger than her entire apartment building. The walls were lined with oil paintings of men who looked like emperors. Maya was asleep on a velvet sofa nearby, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She had been confused but excited by the big car. Sarah was trembling not from cold, but from adrenaline. Claire's throat. Marcus sat across from her, pouring tea from a silver pot. "I know this is overwhelming," Marcus said softly. "Overwhelming," Sarah laughed, a hysterical edge to it. "Marcus, I don't know which fork to use. How am I supposed to run a company that... What does Sterling Global even do? Shipping pharmaceuticals, aerospace, technology and renewable energy, Marcus listed. But you don't need to run the day-to-day operations yet. You have a board for that. Your job right now is to survive the transition." "Transition," Claire's throat. "The sharks are coming," Marcus warned. "Julian and Victoria will not go quietly. They will try to scare you. They will try to buy you out. They might even try to hurt you. Sarah looked at sleeping Mia. The fear in her chest hardened into something else, something sharper. "Let them try," she whispered. "I've fought off eviction, notices hunger, and a system that wanted me to fail since I was 16. Clears throat. I dealt with drunk customers and a boss who stole my tips. I'm not afraid of two spoiled brats in suits." "Good," Marcus smiled. "Because you have a visitor." "Who, the staff?" Marcus said Arthur's household staff. They have been waiting to meet the new mistress. Marcus opened the double doors. 12 staff members stood in a line in the hallway. Maids, a butler, a chef gardeners. They looked nervous. They had heard the rumors. They expected a new tyrant, perhaps worse than Julian. Sarah walked out. She was still wearing her jeans and a cheap sweater, her diner shoes squeaking on the marble. She looked at them. She saw the same look in their eyes that she had in hers every day at the diner. The fear of being invisible, the fear of being replaced. She stopped in front of the head butler, a stiff man named Henderson. "Hello," Sarah said. "Good evening, madam." Henderson bowed stiffly. "We await your orders. Dinner can be served at—" "I don't have orders," Sarah interrupted gently. "But I have a question. When was the last time any of you had a raise?" Henderson blinked, his composure slipping. "A raise." Madam, Mr. Sterling was frugal in his later years. "It has been 7 years." Sarah turned to Marcus. "Double it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Double their salaries." "Double it." Sarah repeated, her voice ringing through the hall. "And full benefits for everyone. Dental vision and college tuition support for their children." She turned back to the stunned line of staff. "My name is Sarah. I worked for tips until 3 hours ago. I know how heavy a tray can be. In this house, we don't look down on the people who keep the lights on. We take care of them." A young maid at the end of the line burst into tears. Henderson's lip quivered. "Thank you, madam," Henderson choked out. "Thank you." Now Sarah said, rubbing her eyes, "Does anyone know how to make a grilled cheese sandwich? I think the new owner of Sterling Global would like a very cheap dinner." The tension broke. Laughter rippled through the staff. They weren't serving a mistress. They were serving a savior. But the laughter was cut short by a loud buzzing from the intercom at the main gate. Marcus stepped to the wall panel and pressed the button. "Yes, this is private property." A voice crackled over the speaker, aggressive, loud, and familiar to Sarah. It wasn't the press. It was worse. "Yo, open up! I know she's in there!" Sarah froze. Her blood ran cold. "It's Brad," she whispered. "Who?" Marcus asked. "My father." Sarah said, her hands clenching into fists. "He hasn't seen her in 3 years. He didn't even call on her birthday. I heard she struck gold." Brad's voice yelled over the intercom. "I want my cut. That's my kid in there. I have rights. Open this gate or I'm calling the cops and saying you kidnapped my daughter." Marcus looked at Sarah. He must have been tipped off by Julian. "This is the first strike." Sarah looked at Maya, still sleeping peacefully. She looked at the luxury around her. Then she looked at the front door. "Don't call the police," Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the waitress tremor and gaining the steel of a matriarch. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. "I'm going to go down there," Sarah said, walking toward the umbrella stand by the door. She grabbed Arthur's old wooden cane that Marcus had brought from the diner. "And I'm going to remind Brad why he left town in the first place." The iron gates of the Sterling estate were tall, imposing, and slick with rain. Through the bars, Brad stared at Sarah. He looked exactly as she remembered. Greasy hair, a charming, crooked smile that hid a cruel nature, and eyes that were constantly scanning for an angle. "Well, look at you," Brad whistled, leaning against the gate. "From waiting tables to living in a castle. And to think you told me you were broke when I asked for rent money 3 years ago." "I was broke," Sarah said, her voice calm. She stood on the other side of the bars, gripping Arthur's wooden cane. She didn't open the gate. "Because you gambled our rent money away." "What do you want?" "I want my family back." Brad grinned, though his eyes drifted to the security cameras. "I miss Maya. And seeing as you're a billionaire now, I figure she needs her daddy. Unless you want to discuss a settlement, say, 10 million, to keep me from telling the press what a terrible mother you are." Sarah stared at him. A week ago this would have broken her. She would have panicked, but she had walked through fire to get here. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black smartphone one Marcus had given her. She pressed a button. "Did you get that, Mr. Thorne?" she asked. "Recorded clear as day. Ms. Jenkins." Marcus's voice came through the phone speaker. "Attempted extortion is a felony in the state of Washington, punishable by up to 10 years in prison." Brad's smile faltered. "You think I'm scared of lawyers I got backing? Julian Sterling himself called me. He's got lawyers who eat guys like yours for breakfast." "Julian Sterling isn't paying your legal bills, Brad." Sarah stepped closer to the bars, her eyes fierce. "He's using you as a grenade. He pulls the pin, throws you at me, and you blow up, but he stays clean. Do you really think he cares if you go to jail?" She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and slid it through the bars. "What's this?" Brad asked. "A plane ticket," Sarah said. "To Florida one way, and a cashier's check for $5,000. Enough to start over." $5,000. Brad laughed nervously. "I'm sitting on a gold mine here." "No," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was colder than the rain. "You are sitting on a warrant for your arrest regarding those stolen car parts in Tacoma. Arthur's security team found it in about 10 minutes. If you aren't on that plane in 3 hours, I hand the file to the police. You go to prison and you never see Maya again. Or you take the money, you leave us alone, and you live." Brad looked at the check. Then he looked at Sarah. He saw a woman he didn't recognize, a mother who had become a fortress. He snatched the check and the ticket. "You got lucky, Sarah, that's all. Luck had nothing to do with it," she replied. Brad turned and ran into the darkness. Sarah watched him go, letting out a breath she felt she'd been holding for years. The next morning, the battlefield shifted to the boardroom of Sterling Global. The room was a cavern of glass overlooking the Seattle skyline. 12 board members sat around a table that cost more than Sarah's childhood home. At the head of the table sat Julian and Victoria, looking smug. When Sarah walked in, flanked by Marcus, the silence was deafening. She wore a simple black suit, her hair pulled back. She didn't look like a waitress. She looked like the owner. "You're late," Julian sneered. "We were just discussing the motion to remove you as CEO due to lack of qualification." "I'm not late," Sarah said, taking the seat at the opposite end of the table. "I was taking my daughter to school. Something you might know about if you ever paid attention to your own families." "This is a business meeting, not a daycare," Victoria snapped. "We have the votes, Sarah. The board agrees. You have no degree, no experience, and a scandalous background. We are invoking the competency clause of the company bylaws to strip you of executive power." "The motion is seconded," a balding board member said, refusing to meet Sarah's eyes. "Before you vote," Marcus Thorne stood up, placing a heavy box on the table. "You should know that Arthur anticipated this moment. Arthur is dead." Julian dismissed him. "His senile ramblings don't matter." On the contrary, Marcus opened the box. Inside was a single old VHS tape and a VCR player. Arthur recorded this the night he rewrote his will. He instructed me to play it only if his children attempted a hostile takeover within the first month. Julian and Victoria exchanged a worried look. Marcus connected the player to the boardroom's massive screen. Static crackled, and then Arthur's face appeared. He was sitting in his study, looking frail but sharp. "Hello, Julian. Hello, Victoria." "The video," Arthur said. The siblings flinched. "If you are watching this, it means you didn't wait. You didn't mourn. You went straight for the throat. You are trying to destroy Sarah on the screen." Arthur leaned forward. "I built this company on a simple principle. Value. You two believe value is what you can take. Sarah knows value is what you can give. I knew you would try to use the competency clause. So I added a poison pill to the trust." Julian went pale. "A poison pill. The moment a motion is filed to remove Sarah Jenkins, all of my personal shares, 51% of the company, are automatically liquidated and donated to the Waitress Fund, a charity I established to feed the homeless. Sterling Global will cease to be a family-owned company. The stock will plummet. You will be kings of a pile of ash." The board members gasped. The balding man stood up. "I withdraw my second motion. Withdrawn." However, Arthur continued on screen, "If Sarah is allowed to lead, the shares remain intact. The choice is yours. Destroy the company to satisfy your ego, or shut up and let her work." The screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute. Julian looked like he was going to be sick. Victoria was trembling with rage, but she remained seated. They were trapped. Their greed had been used against them. Sarah stood up slowly. She looked at the board members, then at the siblings. "I might not know how to hedge a fund yet," Sarah said, her voice clear and resonant. "But I know how to spot a bad investment, and right now the toxic culture in this room is the worst investment we have." She turned to Julian and Victoria. "Get out! You can't fire us," Julian spat. "We're on the board. I'm the majority shareholder," Sarah reminded him. "And I'm cleaning house. You're fired. Security will escort you out." As the guard stepped forward, the same guards who had once blocked Arthur from entering his own building when he was in rags. Sarah added one last thing. "Oh, and Julian." He turned, eyes burning with hate. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a crisp $5 bill. She slid it down the long mahogany table. It stopped right in front of him. Clear as throat. For the valet, she said, "Since you don't have a company car anymore." Sarah didn't just keep the company afloat, she transformed it. Under her leadership, Sterling Global launched the Arthur Initiative, a program that provided housing and job training for thousands of homeless veterans and families. She didn't rule from a glass tower. She ruled from the ground up, often seen in the company cafeteria, asking employees about their families, ensuring every worker felt the dignity she had once been denied. She never forgot the Route 66 diner. She bought the building, fired Rick, giving him a generous severance package, but telling him he lacked the temperament for service, and turned it into a non-profit community kitchen where anyone could eat for free, no questions asked. Every Tuesday night, rain or shine, Sarah and Maya would sit in booth 6. They would eat chicken noodle soup, and Sarah would tell her daughter stories about a grumpy old man named Artie, who had holes in his shoes, but a heart made of gold. Arthur Sterling had spent his life building a fortune, but in his final days, he realized he had built nothing that mattered. It took a $5 tip and an exhausted waitress to teach him the final lesson of economics. The only wealth you keep is the wealth you give away. Wow, what a journey! From a rainy night and a crumpled $5 bill to $1 billion empire, Sarah proved that sometimes the biggest tests in life come when we think no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, or if you cheered when Sarah finally stood up to those greedy siblings, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. I want to know what you would have done if you were Sarah. Would you have forgiven the family, or would you have kicked them out, just like she did? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, always be kind, because you never know who you're really talking